The sun was sinking low over the Wyoming plains, spilling its molten gold across the long miles of dry grass and sage. The land stretched wide and silent, broken only by the call of a crow and the soft groan of saddle leather as Sheriff Boone Callahan rode slow upon his bay horse. Chester Boone was known across Carbon County as the Lonely Giant, a man near 7 feet tall, broad as a freight door, with a face that looked carved from rock and eyes gray as the winter sky. He spoke little, smiled even less. Folks said he'd once been a Union soldier, and some whispered he'd seen too much killing to ever find peace again. The war had left its scars on Boone's soul. He had come west to forget, or at least to live where no one asked about the ghosts behind his eyes. Out here among wind and silence, he'd found a rhythm to his solitude. Patrol the county line, mend fences, drink his coffee black, and sleep alone. But that evening, the rhythm broke. Dust rose ahead on the trail, not the steady dust of a rider, but the uneven, stumbling kind that told of trouble. Boone slowed Chester to a stop, his hand resting on the worn grip of his Colt. As he peered through the haze, his breath caught a woman. She was walking barefoot through the dust, her calico dress torn, blood spattered on her shoulder. Her long hair, once golden, hung matted and dull, tangled with dirt and wind. Boone dismounted and approached slow, like a man nearing a wounded doe. She looked up at him, eyes wide with terror, and whispered, barely a breath, "No more pain. Please, no more." Then she collapsed against him. Boone caught her easily, feeling how small she was in his arms. Her pulse fluttered weakly against his wrist. He saw the lash marks on her back, the bruises along her neck. Whoever had done this had meant to break her, body and soul. He lifted her onto Chester, swung into the saddle, and rode hard for his cabin by the Sweetwater River, a lonely place tucked between cottonwoods and canyon rock. The ride took near an hour, but Boone didn't slow. The woman stirred once, murmuring something about Elias and the preacher, then went still again. Inside the cabin, Boone laid her gently on his bunk. He fetched clean water, whiskey, and an old Army medical kit. He cleaned her wounds with quiet care, rough hands but steady. She moaned when the alcohol touched her skin, and Boone muttered, "Easy now, you're safe." When he was done, he covered her with a wool blanket and sat back by the fire. He poured himself a tin cup of whiskey but didn't drink. He just watched her, the way her chest rose and fell, the way her lips trembled in sleep. Hours passed. The fire burned low, the wind howled through the cracks in the shutters, and Boone's mind began to wander. He thought of his wife, Mary, and their little boy, James, both buried in Missouri, victims of fever after the war. He had promised himself never to care again, never to let another life depend on his protection. But looking at that girl in his bed, Boone felt something old stirring, something dangerous, compassion. When she woke near dawn, her eyes were wild, darting around the room until they found him sitting by the hearth. She shrank back, clutching the blanket. "Where am I?" she asked, voice cracked and dry. "My cabin," Boone said. "You passed out on the road." She hesitated. You're not one of them?" "Ma'am, I don't know who them is," he replied, his tone low and even. "But I don't hurt folks." Tears welled in her eyes. "His name is Elias Deveraux. He calls himself a preacher, but he's the devil in disguise." Boone's eyes narrowed. He knew that name. Everyone in 3 counties did. Elias Deveraux was a self-styled man of God who'd built a mining camp south of Sweetwater. New Eden, he called it, a place that promised salvation but dealt in fear. Men worked under the lash. Women disappeared. Boone poured her a cup of water. "You ran from him," she nodded. "He said I belonged to him, that God had chosen me, but when I tried to leave, he sent his men after me." Her voice broke. "They caught me, whipped me, said he'd finish it himself when I crawled back." Boone's jaw clenched. "You're safe here," he said simply. She looked at him, studying the lines of his face. "Why would you help me?" He didn't answer. Maybe he didn't know. Maybe it was because he'd seen enough cruelty to know when to stand against it, even if it meant facing the devil himself. When morning came full, Boone went outside to fetch water. The air was sharp and cold, the kind that bit through denim and skin alike, but something else caught his eye. Hoof prints in the soft earth near the cabin. 3 sets, fresh. He crouched, studying the direction. They came from the south. Boone's stomach turned cold. He walked back inside, his shadow dark across the floor. "We got company coming," he said. Clara, she had told him her name as dawn crept in, went pale. "His men?" "Most likely. What will you do?" Boone loaded his rifle with slow, deliberate movements. "What I've done before." She stared at him, seeing for the first time the weight behind those eyes, the quiet resolve of a man who'd lost everything but still stood when others would run. Boone strapped on his gun belt, looked at her one last time, and said, "If the devil's coming for you, miss, then he's got to go through me first." The morning sun had barely climbed above the Wyoming hills when Boone Callahan saddled Chester again. The hoofprints outside his cabin weren't fading. They were fresh, made by horses moving slow, deliberate like wolves stalking their prey. He knew the kind of men that followed a preacher like Elias Deveraux. They weren't believers. They were sinners too far gone to hide from their own shadows, killers wrapped in Bible verses, men who took joy in cruelty and called it salvation. Inside, Clara Mayfield sat by the hearth, the old army blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The firelight touched her face, softening the bruises, but couldn't hide the fear. Boone stepped in, dust on his boots and rifle in hand. "They're close," he said flatly. Her eyes widened. "Then you have to leave me here. If they see you with me, they'll—" "Stop." Boone's voice was low, final. "I ain't leaving you." She swallowed, the tremble in her hands betraying her words. "You don't understand, Mr. Callahan. Elias, he doesn't just punish, he hunts. He says God shows him where his runaways go." Boone pulled his duster coat from the peg, slung his rifle over his shoulder. "Then we'll give God something to look at." He handed her an old Stetson hat and a pair of worn boots that had belonged to his late wife. They didn't fit perfect, but they'd do. "We ride north," he said. "There's a place called Red Creek, ghost town since the silver dried up. We can hole up there, make a plan." Clara hesitated, glancing out the window where the Sweetwater River glittered like silver glass. "You shouldn't have helped me," she whispered. Boone cinched the saddle tight and gave her a faint, grim smile. "Ma'am, I stopped worrying about what I shouldn't do a long time ago." They rode out, the wind carrying dust and the faint smell of rain. The land stretched wide, rolling plains, dry gullies, old cottonwoods leaning like tired sentinels. Boone rode ahead, scanning the horizon while Clara followed close, clutching the reins. For hours they rode in silence, save for the rhythm of hooves and the creak of leather. Then Clara began to speak, not in a rush but in broken pieces, as if each word cost her breath. "I was 16 when I came west," she said. "My father died in Kansas. I thought joining a church out here would be safe. Elias said he could give me purpose." Boone said nothing, letting her talk. "He told me I was chosen, said God spoke through him. At first he was kind. Then came the sermons about obedience. Then the punishments. Anyone who questioned him vanished. Some said they went back east." She looked down, voice shaking. "I know better now." Boone's jaw tightened. "What he done ain't preaching, it's poison," Clara nodded. "He keeps the women in a camp by the mine. Makes them work, clean, cook. Says the Lord loves labor. When I tried to run, his men—" Her voice caught. "He told me I'd burn if I left." Boone glanced over, his eyes hard. "Ain't no God I know who burns a woman for wanting to live." They rode on until the sky began to bleed into orange and red. Red Creek appeared on the horizon like a ghost. Sagging buildings, broken windows, the wind whistling through hollow doorframes. Once it had been a bustling mining town. Now it was a graveyard of memories. Boone led Chester into what had been the main street and dismounted. "We'll stay here tonight." He found an old saloon half collapsed but still standing, its roof sheltering a battered piano and a line of empty bottles behind the counter. Boone gathered what firewood he could and lit a small blaze in the corner stove. Clara wandered through the room, her hand brushing over the cracked piano keys. "Used to play in church," she said softly. "Before all this." "Still can," Boone said. She smiled faintly, sat down and pressed one key. It rang out thin and lonely, echoing through the ruined town. Slowly she began to play a hymn. "Abide with me." Her voice was soft, worn, but full of something Boone hadn't heard in a long time. Hope. He sat by the fire, listening. The melody carried through the broken windows and out into the night, a fragile sound against the wind. For a moment Boone forgot the danger, forgot the blood and scars. Then the crow called. Once, twice, a warning. Boone's instincts flared. He stood, moving to the window. The ridge to the south glowed faintly, not from the sun, but from lanterns. He counted 3 riders. He cursed under his breath. They're here. Clara froze, her hand still on the keys. Elias? Not yet. His dogs. Boone snuffed the fire with his boot and grabbed his rifle. Get down! Behind the bar, outside, hoofbeats drew near. The first man rode into town slow, shotgun resting across his saddle. Another followed, carrying a lantern that swung like a ghost light. Boone waited, crouched low, every muscle taut as wire. Spread out, one of the men called. She's here somewhere. The preacher said he saw her in his dreams. Boone's lip curled. Dreams, my ass, he muttered. He took aim through a crack in the wall. The first man passed directly in front of the saloon. Boone fired once, clean and true. The rider dropped without a sound, falling into the dust. The others shouted, bullets slamming into the saloon walls. Glass shattered. Wood splintered. Boone ducked, reloaded, and fired again. Another man screamed and fell from his horse. The last rider turned tail, spurring his horse toward the ridge. Boone stepped out onto the street, rifle raised. He could have shot him. He didn't. He wanted that man to run back to Elias Deveraux and tell him the truth, that the woman he thought he owned was under the protection of Boone Callahan. That night, when the gunfire faded and silence returned to Red Creek, Boone found Clara sitting behind the bar, trembling. Her hands were clasped tight around the old Bible she'd taken from the saloon shelf. They'll come for us now, she whispered. Boone reloaded his rifle, his face lit by the dying fire. Then let 'em come. He walked to the doorway, looking out across the moonlit plains where the devil's hounds had vanished into darkness. His voice was calm, but inside a storm had begun to rise, a reckoning long overdue. Behind him, Clara said softly, "You could have run. You could have left me." Boone turned, the faintest hint of a smile on his scarred face. "Ma'am, I told you once, I ain't in the habit of leaving people to the wolves." Outside, thunder rolled over the horizon. The storm was coming, and Boone Callahan, the lonely giant of Sweetwater, would be ready to meet it head-on. The next dawn bled gray across the wreckage of Red Creek. The wind moaned through the half-collapsed rooftops, stirring ashes and bullet casings like ghosts remembering old wars. Boone Callahan stood in the street, his rifle barrel still smoking, eyes scanning the ridge where the last of Deveraux's riders had fled hours earlier. He knew what would come next. Elias Deveraux wouldn't forgive failure. The man's pride was as black and heavy as coal, and Boone had just struck it with steel. By nightfall, the preacher would come himself, Bible in one hand, gun in the other. Boone could almost hear the man's honeyed voice whispering from across the plains, "Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord." Boone spat into the dust. "We'll see about that." Inside the saloon, Clara Mayfield was tending to the fire, her hands steady now, no longer shaking. Boone had shown her how to load a rifle, how to aim. She'd practiced with calm focus, surprising him with her resolve. The woman who'd whispered no more pain was starting to look like someone who might face the world and dare it to try again. She caught him watching her and asked, "You think he'll come tonight?" Boone nodded. "He'll come. Men like him always have to look their devil in the eye before they fall." Clara's brow furrowed. "You think you're his devil?" Boone gave a quiet half-smile. "Reckon I might be." By midday, Boone had turned Red Creek into a fortress. He used the old mining carts to barricade the street, stacked barrels and timbers to block the saloon windows, and filled lanterns with oil. If Deveraux's men came, he'd greet them with fire and lead. Clara helped where she could, hauling water, loading ammunition. The work gave her purpose, and Boone could see the change in her. There was fear still, yes, but under it burned a spark of something stronger. Anger. Not the kind that consumes, but the kind that keeps you alive. As the sun dipped west, Boone climbed the church steeple, the only building left standing tall in Red Creek. He scanned the plains with his spyglass. Nothing but wind and distance. But his gut told him the calm wouldn't last, and he was right. Just before sunset, the horizon darkened with riders. They came slow, 20 maybe, a mix of miners, drifters, and hired guns. But at their head rode Elias Deveraux, tall and thin, dressed in black from hat to boots, his white preacher's collar gleaming against the dusk. He sat his horse like a man born to command, eyes fixed straight ahead. When they reached the edge of town, Deveraux raised his hand and his men halted. The preacher's voice carried on the wind, smooth as silk, deadly as sin. "Sheriff Boone Callahan, you harbor a sinner and a thief. The Lord demands justice. Hand her over and you'll be spared his wrath." Boone stepped into the open street, rifle across his chest. His coat flapped in the wind, and the setting sun painted his scarred face in red light. "Ain't no lord I ever met that sent a whip with his blessings," he called back. Deveraux smiled thinly. "You think yourself righteous, lawman? That girl you hide is mine by covenant. She pledged herself to me before God." Boone spat into the dust. "Then God best get himself a new preacher." The camp behind Deveraux stirred with mutters. The preacher's eyes darkened. He reached into his saddlebag and drew out a small, weathered Bible. Opening it, he read aloud, voice rising like thunder. "For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness as iniquity and idolatry." Then he closed it, drew his pistol, and said, "So I'll burn the witch and you with her." The first shot rang out sharp and deafening. Boone dove behind the cart barricade as bullets tore through the air. The quiet town exploded into chaos, gunfire cracking, glass shattering, dust boiling up in clouds. Clara crouched behind the bar, clutching her rifle. Boone's deep voice roared from the street, "Keep your head down, girl. Only shoot when you can see the whites of their eyes." She nodded, heart pounding like a drum. Then a shadow loomed near the doorway, one of Deveraux's men creeping close with a knife. Clara aimed, fired. The man dropped instantly. Her hands trembled afterward, but she didn't cry. She reloaded. Outside, Boone moved like a man possessed, calm, efficient, deadly. His rifle cracked once, twice, 3 times, each shot deliberate. 2 men fell, another screamed and stumbled into the dust. The smell of gunpowder and sweat filled the air. Deveraux shouted orders, fury twisting his face. "Take the girl alive. Kill the rest." Boone ducked behind the cart, reloading. He caught a glimpse of Deveraux standing tall on his horse, white collar gleaming like a viper's fang. Boone took aim through the smoke, exhaled slow, and pulled the trigger. The shot split the preacher's hat clean in 2. Deveraux flinched, barely dodging the bullet that might have ended him. He slid from the saddle and vanished behind a trough. Boone cursed softly. The bastard was fast. Then came the silence, that awful, waiting silence when both sides reload and count the dead. Boone's shoulder burned where a bullet had grazed him, but he paid it no mind. He turned, checking the saloon window. Clara was still there, rifle steady, eyes fierce. Then a flicker, movement on the left. Boone's eyes caught it a moment too late. One of Deveraux's men had circled behind. The shot came hard, hitting Boone in the shoulder. The impact threw him back against the post. Pain flared bright and hot. He gritted his teeth, fired back, and dropped the man. But his arm hung useless. He stumbled inside the saloon, blood soaking his sleeve. Clara was already there, catching him before he fell. "Boone," she cried. "You're hit." He grunted, waving her off. "Ain't dead yet." She tore strips from her dress, pressing them against the wound. "Hold still," she whispered. "You saved me. Now it's my turn." Outside, the sound of retreat echoed, hooves fading into the distance. The survivors of Deveraux's gang were pulling back, dragging their wounded and leaving their dead. Only one man didn't move, Elias Deveraux. He stood in the middle of the street, staring at the saloon with a cold, murderous calm. "You can't keep her, Sheriff," he called. "She's mine by blood and faith. God himself sent me to claim her." Boone, pale and bleeding, managed a weak smile. "Then tell your God he's late." The preacher's lip curled into something almost inhuman. "You've made yourself an enemy of heaven." Boone raised his rifle one last time, sighted on the man's chest. "Nah," he said. "Just of you." But before he could fire, lightning split the sky, a sudden crash of thunder rolling across the plains. Deveraux turned his horse and vanished into the storm. The devil had retreated. For now. Boone sank back into Clara's arms. The pain hit him full force, his breath ragged. "Damn fool thing," he muttered. "Getting shot over a stranger." She shook her head, tears cutting clean lines through the soot on her cheeks. "You're no fool, Boone Callahan. You're the only good man I've known." He managed a half smile. "Don't go spreading that around." "Ruin my reputation," Clara laughed, a broken, beautiful sound in the silence after battle. Then she pressed her forehead to his and whispered, "You can't die." "Not you." Boone closed his eyes, exhaled slow. "Don't plan to. Not till the devil's dead." Outside, the rain began to fall, soft at first, then steady. washing the blood from the dirt. Red Creek, that ghost of a town, breathed again beneath the storm, and as thunder rolled across the Wyoming plains, the lonely giant slept in the arms of the woman he had saved, while the devil plotted his return. When Boone Callahan woke again, the storm had passed and a gray dawn hung low over Red Creek. The saloon smelled of smoke, gun oil, and rain-soaked wood. His arm throbbed like fire where the bullet had carved through muscle, but the bleeding had stopped. He turned his head and saw Clara Mayfield sitting near the hearth, half asleep with her head resting on her knees. She had wrapped his shoulder tight with linen torn from her petticoat, then sat awake all night, rifle across her lap. Boone shifted, groaning quietly. Her eyes flicked open at once. "You're alive," she breathed, relief flooding her voice. "Don't sound so surprised," he rasped, a ghost of a grin flickering on his face. She rose, fetched water, and held it out to him. "Drink," he did, grimacing as he swallowed. "How long was I out?" 2 days. Maybe 3. I lost count, Boone's brow furrowed. 3 days. He pushed himself up, ignoring the pain. Then he's had time to regroup. Clara looked toward the doorway where the storm's remnants still dripped from the eaves. "Elias won't stop. Not after you shamed him in front of his men." Boone reached for his coat, moving slow. "I know. You can't fight him again, not like this. You're hurt." He fixed her with those gray iron eyes. "I've fought hurt before. Besides, it ain't just me he's after now." She looked down, guilt shadowing her face. "I never meant for you to get caught in my fight." Boone shook his head. "Ain't your fight anymore, Clara. It's ours." They left Red Creek before noon, riding south across a land washed clean by rain. The plains shimmered under the weak sunlight, and the air smelled of wet sage. Boone rode with his wounded arm in a sling, reins looped loosely in his other hand. Clara followed close, watching the horizon. She had changed since he found her, still gentle but no longer helpless. Boone had seen it happen day by day, the way a wilted flower straightens after the storm. He broke the silence. "There's a place called Black Hollow near the old copper mine." "That's where he'll be," she nodded. "That's where I came from." Boone glanced over. "Tell me about it." She hesitated, then spoke. "It's a camp built on fear. Men mine all day and give him the silver. He says the Lord wants it for a New Jerusalem. The women cook, wash, serve the preacher. Those who disobey vanish." Boone's grip tightened on the reins. "You seen the ones who vanish?" "I saw what was left," she said softly. "He says they burned for their sins. But I know better." Boone's voice hardened. "Then he'll answer for that." They rode through canyons and arroyos, through country so empty it made a soul feel small. Coyotes watched from the ridges, and thunderheads brewed in the distance. At night they made camp by rivers or under the shelter of cottonwoods. Boone taught Clara to build a fire without smoke, to clean her revolver, to listen to the night for what didn't belong. Each night, the silence between them grew warmer, easier. One evening, by the glow of a small fire, Clara asked quietly, "Why are you helping me, Boone? You could have left me that day. Most men would have." Boone stared into the flames for a long while before answering. "Once back in Missouri I had a wife, Mary, and a boy, James. Fever took 'em both. I buried 'em myself." Clara lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry," he nodded, his voice rough. "After that I rode west. Figured if I stayed busy enough I'd stop thinking, but the truth is some things don't fade. You just learn to carry 'em." He glanced up, meeting her gaze. "When I saw you in that dust, it felt like the Lord was giving me one last chance to do something right." Her eyes softened. "You already did," Boone smiled faintly. "Maybe, but it ain't over yet." By the 3rd day the terrain changed. The soil turned dark, almost black, and the air thickened with the smell of coal smoke. Clara's horse grew restless. Boone knew the feeling. Evil had a scent, and he could smell it now. They reached a rise overlooking a valley carved by mining pits and shacks. At the center stood a white tent, larger than any church, its sides painted with red crosses. Armed men patrolled the grounds, and a rough-hewn pulpit stood before it, where Elias Deveraux preached to a ragged crowd. His voice carried faintly even from the ridge. "The wages of sin is death. The Lord speaks through me, and I bring his fire to the faithless." Boone lowered the spyglass, disgusted. Fire and brimstone, all to hide the stink of his own rot. Clara's hands trembled on the reins. "Those people down there, they don't know any better. They think he's their savior." Boone studied the camp a long while. "Then maybe it's time someone told him the truth." That night, under the moonless sky, Boone and Clara crept down the ridge. They moved like shadows between the miners' tents, avoiding patrols, their boots silent on the dusty ground. The camp smelled of sweat, fear, and iron. Clara slipped into a shack where women were kept, pale, hollow-eyed figures who froze when she entered. Recognition sparked in a few faces. "Clara?" one whispered. "We thought you were dead." She shook her head. "Not dead, free, and you can be too. No more pain, no more fear. He's just a man, and he bleeds like one." The women looked uncertain, hope and terror warring in their eyes, but one by one they nodded. Meanwhile, Boone slipped toward the preacher's tent. Inside he saw Deveraux kneeling before a mirror, speaking softly to his reflection as if in prayer. "The Lord speaks through me," he murmured. "I am his vessel. I am his wrath." Boone stepped into the tent, gun drawn. "You're just a coward with a Bible, Deveraux." The preacher spun, eyes wide, then narrowed. "Callahan." His smile returned, slow and venomous. "I knew you'd come." Boone's voice was ice. "You took everything from those people. From her. That ends tonight." Deveraux laughed softly. "You think to face the hand of God with a gun?" Boone aimed steady. "Ain't God you'll be facing." Before Deveraux could answer, a gunshot split the night. Not Boone's, but from outside. Then another, then 5 more. Screams filled the air. The camp was waking up. Clara and the women had struck first, cutting down guards, overturning oil lamps, spreading chaos. Flames leapt skyward, lighting the hollow like hell itself. Deveraux lunged for his pistol, but Boone fired first, the shot tearing through the tent pole and grazing the preacher's arm. Deveraux stumbled back, snarling. "I'll see you burn for this," he hissed. "Maybe," Boone said, stepping closer, "but I'll see you fall first." The preacher dove through the side of the tent, vanishing into the chaos. Boone cursed, followed. Outside, the camp was ablaze. Women ran free, men shouted, gunfire cracked. Clara stood at the edge of the crowd, rifle raised, her hair whipping in the wind, the fire painting her face gold and red. Boone reached her side. "He's running." "Then let's finish it," she said. Together, they turned toward the burning valley, a lawman and a scarred woman, riding straight into hell to bring down a false prophet. And as the fire roared behind them, Boone Callahan knew this wasn't just vengeance anymore. It was redemption. The black hollow burned like Judgment Night. Flames rolled through the miners' camp, licking the sky and painting the clouds in blood-red light. Men ran like frightened cattle, some trying to save what silver they'd dug from the earth, others fleeing the wrath they'd once helped build. Boone Callahan and Clara Mayfield rode through the inferno side by side, 2 riders cut from fire and fury. Smoke coiled around them and the ground shook beneath the hooves of their horses. Somewhere ahead, Elias Deveraux ran toward the old copper mine, the devil's breath on his neck. Boone reined in near a row of burning shacks. "He's heading for the tunnels." Clara's eyes gleamed in the firelight. "Then we'll bring him down where he started, in the dark." Boone nodded once. "Stay close." They dismounted at the mine's mouth, a yawning hole in the earth, black and breathing smoke. The air inside reeked of sulfur and fear. Boone drew his revolver, checked the cylinder, then glanced at her. "You ready?" Clara tightened her grip on the rifle. "I stopped being scared the day I ran from him." Together they stepped into the dark. The mine swallowed them whole. Their lantern threw a weak, trembling light across the walls, showing streaks of green copper and dripping veins of ore. The deeper they went, the thicker the air became, filled with the echo of their boots and the distant groan of shifting rock. Somewhere ahead, a voice murmured scripture. "And the beast was taken and cast into a lake of fire." Boone raised the lantern. "He's close." The tunnel opened into a cavern where the preacher stood, wild-eyed, coat-torn, pistol shaking in his hand. His silver cross hung crooked on his chest, gleaming in the dim light. When he saw them, he smiled, a smile too calm for a man cornered. "You think you've won, Callahan? You think this ends with me?" Boone aimed steady. "It ends with you or me, preacher. Either way, the devil's going hungry tonight." Deveraux's laughter echoed off the stone. "You don't understand. I was chosen. These people needed order. I gave them purpose." "You gave them chains," Boone said coldly. The preacher's hand twitched and the gun fired. The shot cracked through the cavern, grazing Boone's side and splintering the lantern. Darkness swallowed them. Clara ducked behind a rock, heart hammering. She could hear the preacher's voice moving in the dark. You can't kill the word of God, woman. You can't kill salvation? Boone gritted his teeth, blood trickling from his side. Maybe not, he growled, but I can sure as hell kill you. He fired toward the voice, once, twice, the flashes lighting up the cavern like lightning. The third shot hit true. Deveraux screamed, stumbling back against the rock. Clara lit another match, bringing faint light to the preacher's face. Blood ran down his arm, but he still smiled. You think you freed her, Callahan? She'll never be clean. The Lord marked her. She's mine. Boone raised his gun again, but Clara's voice cut through. No, she said, stepping forward. I'm my own. Before the preacher could move, she fired. The bullet struck his chest right where the silver cross hung. The force threw him back into the pit where the mine shafts split open. And with one final roar, the timbers gave way. Elias Deveraux fell screaming into the black, his voice fading beneath the thunder of collapsing stone. The devil had been faced, and this time the devil lost. When they emerged from the mine, dawn was breaking. Smoke drifted across the valley, but the fire was dying. The air smelled of ash and rain, and the first light touched the hills with gold. The camp was silent except for the crackle of dying flames. The women and miners who'd survived gathered near the creek, faces pale but eyes alive. Clara spoke softly to them, her voice calm and sure, like the preacher's had once been. But hers carried truth, not poison. You're free now, she said. The silver, the land, it's yours. Build something better. No more pain. A murmur of agreement spread through the crowd. Some wept, some prayed. Others simply stared at her as if seeing sunlight for the first time. Boone stood apart, hat low, watching. His side burned where the bullet had grazed him, but it was the kind of pain a man could live with. He had seen blood and death enough to know that most stories didn't end this way. When she came to him, he tried to smile. Guess that's done. Clara looked up at him, her face streaked with soot but her eyes shining clear. You saved me, Boone, he shook his head. No, ma'am. You saved yourself. I just happened to be there. She reached for his hand. Then maybe you could keep being there. Boone blinked, caught off guard by the softness in her voice. You sure you want a man like me hanging around? I ain't much for church and I got more ghosts than I got friends. Clara smiled faintly. You've got a heart big enough to fight the devil himself. That's enough for me. For a long moment neither spoke. The wind blew across the burned valley, carrying the scent of sage and freedom. Then Boone nodded slowly. All right, Miss Mayfield. Let's see what kind of peace two broken souls can build. They buried the dead by the creek, marking each grave with a wooden cross. Boone didn't say much. Words had never been his strong suit. But when he came to Deveraux's grave, he paused. He looked down at the mound of dirt, jaw tight. You were wrong about one thing, preacher. God don't speak through hate. He speaks through mercy, and you never knew a lick of it. Then he turned away, and the past finally stayed buried. Weeks later, they built a small cabin at the edge of the valley, where the hills rolled green and wild horses grazed in the distance. Boone worked the land, cutting wood, fixing fences, and sometimes staring off toward the horizon as if expecting ghosts to come riding out of it. Clara tended the garden, cooked and read aloud from books she'd salvaged from the preacher's tent. Not scripture twisted to control men, but stories that spoke of hope and second chances. At night, they'd sit on the porch with coffee or whiskey, watching the stars climb over the black ridges. Boone's hand would rest over hers, rough and gentle. One evening she whispered, Do you ever think about leaving, Boone? About the world out there? He took a slow sip, eyes on the moon. I used to. Not anymore. The world's big enough right here. She leaned against him, quiet for a while, then said softly, No more pain. Boone turned, meeting her eyes. No more pain, he echoed. And as the night settled around them, the crickets singing, the air cool and clean, it felt like the West itself had gone still, holding its breath for two souls who'd earned their peace. Years later, travelers passing through Red Creek would hear stories about them, the tall man with the iron-gray eyes and the woman who once whispered to the dust. They said the two built a haven where the broken could find rest, where no preacher or outlaw dared tread, and sometimes on the quietest nights, folks swore they heard a voice on the wind or a woman's voice, soft as prayer whispering across the sagebrush, no more pain.